I know that we are still waiting for a few hosts to join, but I would like to get started. And just like I said, in the interest of time, get things rolling. So I rarely turn my camera on, but um, let me introduce myself. My name is Amanda Hildebrand. I am SAE's membership manager, and I'm really excited to have you all here for this mentor mixer on conflict management. Our hosts today are also available through this live session and then also the online discussion that we're having in Member Connection. So if we could, why don't we have the hosts introduce themselves? And Corey, if you haven't already, if you wouldn't mind going ahead and pressing record, we are going to record the session so that we can share it with others that weren't able to make it this time. So why don't we start with Michelle? You can go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we'll move on to Andrea.
All right. Hi. Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Michelle Kaiser. I'm a business development manager at John Deere. I'm based out of Urbandale, Iowa, and I work for our Intelligent Solutions group. And the fun part of my job is I get to scout for technology and talent that help unlock value for our customers. So I'm really excited to be here. I've been a member of SAE ever since my college mini Baja days and had a ton of fun with that. I serve on the SAE Commercial Vehicle Executive Council and am excited to be a mentor and part of this event today. So thanks for having me.
Thank you. Okay. And Andrea, why don't you go next?
Hi, I'm Andrea Strozellik. I'm a program director for the Master of Engineering in Engine Systems degree program at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I have been an SAE member for nearly 20 years, believe it or not. I am the current chair of the emissions exhaust aftertreatment and emissions control committee and the vice chair of the PFL activity. And I've been an SAE author on a book about emissions control. So I'm all in with SAE. And I am also very happy to be here today and join in this discussion.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I love that both of you are very super SAE people and so involved. That's fantastic. I think our other host joined us. Casalia, I don't want to mispronounce your name.
Yes.
So I did the best I could just now. So why don't
No,
you go
Amanda,
ahead and introduce
you
yourself?
did good. You did good.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. So hi, everyone. This is Kaushalya. I can't turn my video on because I'm using my work computer right now. I'm sorry about it. I'm Kausalya Singuru. I go by Kaushi. I'm working with American Excellent Manufacturing Company, which is headquartered in Detroit. I'm the senior manager, device and vehicle controls. I'm responsible for a team of control systems engineers and subsystems engineers, who kind of integrate the hardware and software and components and then deliver the entire subsystem to the OEM. So that's where I come in. My expertise is model-based development, software development, and subsystems and systems architecture and integration. I've been an SAE member for only a couple of years now, 2-3 years, although I've been in engineering and in this world for quite some time because of other commitments, whatever the reasons are. But I'm glad to be here, and I hope to learn quite a bit from this group here today.
Perfect. So again, really appreciate all of your participation. And I see that we have a good amount of folks on the phone, or rather on the phone, on the computer. So does anyone have any questions for our hosts right out of the gate, or I can start asking the questions to kick things off? Okay, that's what I thought was going to happen because sometimes you can just be, shy to get on the dance floor. So let's kick things off. I'm going to start with Michelle. So I'm going to just go with some of your starter questions that you provided, and if you can just kind of tell us a little bit about, what your thoughts are around one of your starter questions. So I'm going to pick one at random. So why don't you tell us what has worked well for you to resolve conflict, and maybe some of the things that really haven't worked well?
Yeah, and I think, conflict takes on many different forms in the workplace. So throughout my time at Deere, I've worked in a lot of different organizations. I've worked in operations at a factory, and I can tell you conflict there looks a lot different than here at our Intelligent Solutions Group, where we're having conflicts over innovative solutions and how we're going to best serve our customers. So the answer is different depending on that situation. But I think really good, healthy conflict, which is one of my favorite things about my current job when we're really debating the best solutions. The best way for that is you got to try to draw out everybody and get all the opinions out there. So one of the things I look for, and especially when there's sort of this conflicting, are we going to go this way or that way? I draw out the person that hasn't said anything yet, because most of the time they are sitting there processing it. They have an opinion, they have a thought, and they're just kind of watching to see how this thing is going to play out. So that's the first thing I try to do, is get another opinion on the table. And then try to encourage people to, all right, now let's center around that idea. What do we think about that? So I find that strategy works really well. Draw out the quiet ones. I also try to do a lot of engagement with just different people. Like sometimes it's like, hey, who's not in the room here? Who do we need to bring in? So it's kind of the same theme of drawing out the voices that aren't speaking that are in the room, but also figure out who's not at the table that should be in the room. Um, so those are a couple of things I've tried to do. Again, in a factory environment, things can sometimes get a little bit more heated. That's just how it is. And then sometimes you do just have to take a side and make a decision and move on. So just kind of knowing when you have to be in the role of facilitator or when you have to be in the role of mediator and make a decision and move on.
If I could comment, I think Michelle said some really great stuff. And I think one thing that's not necessarily the focus of this panel, but I think is worth mentioning, is it really goes to show the importance of having a diverse set of opinions available when trying to resolve this, and how to be equitable about, giving everyone a chance to participate.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the cool things about working here in this innovation space. And I think you have something similar at WID probably. But you've got people who grew up on farms here. You have people that have never even seen a farm. And like when you get those two sides together, like you're going to have some really fun and interesting conversations, and ultimately kind of help us see the thing that goes sort of beyond what we need to see. And you're right. I mean, the more diversity of thought you have in a room, the better off you're going to be.
Yeah, and I should have mentioned, even though I'm asking your starter question, Michelle, of course, want to hear what everyone on the panel has to say in regard to that particular question. So please just let it be a dialogue, among everyone. Anyone on the phone have any other follow-up questions to what our hosts have said so far?
This is Donna. I do. Have you all run into then those situations where you almost came in expecting to have pushback maybe on your ideas or pushback on a certain situation, and you don't get any? So you actually have to almost create a tension, create a conflict in there to get at, like you guys were talking about, the best ideas or the best way forward.
I think Donna, right? So, sometimes, when you try to put forth an idea, it happens several times with me. When you put forth an idea, the room is quiet, right? Nobody is really saying anything. It could be like everybody is resisting and is afraid to say anything to you. B, they all agree with you, right? Or they don't have any opinions to share. So sometimes most of the times what I try to do is be inclusive, right? Try to poke around, try to bring in some of those folks who you would think can have an opinion, can give some feedback and say, what do you think, what's your opinion on this? I know you have some ideas. How different is it from what your idea is? Do you have any comments? So kind of, having that inclusive, behavior, bringing that into a team helps always, right? Either that person can come up with feedback and comments, or someone else would be triggered with that question and then can say, oh, you know what, this could be a better idea than what you think. And most of the times, letting people speak up, right? Giving that freedom for people to speak up, letting them know that you're open for ideas is more important, I think, to bring in that healthy argument. It's really, really important for productivity.
I think there's a couple things you got to consider too. If you throw something out there and the room stays quiet, one of them is there trust here in this room? And do we have the relationship that they know they can disagree with me? So I think trust and sort of relationship building are the foundational pieces of healthy conflict. But then think about, who is that person in your organization? I think we all have one. Who is that person in the organization that is always willing to debate me, or is always willing to sort of talk about the thing I haven't thought of yet? Who is the person that's always willing to play devil's advocate? And make sure you bring that person in, because I think as was said earlier, right, sometimes people are shy about getting on the dance floor, and so you need the person that's not shy to get on the dance floor to come out and get it started. So make sure you know who those people are and think of them as sort of your advocates to get a good debate going.
Yeah, and so to do two things, to answer the question, but to also engage my colleague, Heather Smith, who has now also joined us as a panelist. I've learned from Heather in particular how to ask really good questions. I think it's one of the strengths that Heather brings to our organization is when there is a difference of opinion or not, right? She will ask questions surrounding, the motivations behind, why people think something is a good idea or a bad idea. So if you have a situation, and I don't know we've ever had this in our office, Heather, where everyone is, where someone brings up an idea and everyone just completely agrees, then I think, asking questions surrounding, well, why do you think this is the right decision? Or, do you see any shortcomings of making this choice, might be able to get the conversation going.
Thank you.
Oops, you're on mute, Heather.
I have a question. My name is Mary, and I work at BASF. And what do you do when you're sort of having a group discussion, reviewing all different people's opinions, but one person really dominates and really talks like they know the facts, cold facts and hard, but they're not really accurate?
Yeah, this is the beauty of being able to pull in another perspective. So in this conversation, if I'm dominating and I'm just saying, no, it is absolutely this way and it is black and white, then if Heather's facilitating, she might say, Andrea, why don't you share with us your view now? And then you just sort of quiet that other person down without actually calling them out as being ridiculous or calling them out as being dominant. But I think that's the skill of really facilitating a discussion like that. And even if you're not leading the conversation, Heather might say, Andrea, I've heard from Michelle and I understand her point of view, but Andrea, can you share with me what you think? Because you have experience in X, Y, and Z, right? So even as a participant, draw other people out, and that'll kind of help shut down the dominant voice.
Very good, thank you.
Hey, and thank you for making the products we buy better.
You're welcome.
Me tell you.
Does anyone else?
Now.
Oh yeah, we can hear you now, Heather.
Yeah,
We
can
got
hear
you, Heather.
I apologize
aboard.
for all the system problems.
No worries. Welcome. Does anyone else? Oh, I'm sorry. You know what, Heather? Why don't you take a moment and introduce yourself to the group?
Sure, and I apologize for my lateness. Definitely had some system problems today. My name is Heather Smith, and I'm the program director of the Master of Engineering Management program at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Still a bit flustered from all the system problems that I've had this morning, so thank you.
It is totally okay. Every time I think technology is supposed to make things easier, that is not always the case. So no problem at all. Just happy to have you here. Does anyone else from the audience have a question that they would like to pose, or I can move on and provide another question to the hosts? No? Okay. So let's see. Next up, we have a question from Kasalia. And I really like this question about how do you encourage healthy arguments in the workplace? I think that that is a really great question and would love to hear everyone's thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'd like, I think, the other host to speak up here too as well. But I think, you know what?
Absolutely.
Yeah, what, you know, some of, yeah, there were several instances, right, where you would realize that some arguments, you know, you'd have to act as a moderator and facilitator and then say, okay, quiet the room down. And there are some instances where you think people are hesitant to speak up because, again, you know, I think one question that was asked that really resonated with me. There's always this one person who dominates, and everyone else is, oh no, you know, he is or she is the technical expert. I don't know if my argument is going to weigh more here, so I'll be rather quiet and sit in this corner of the room rather than speak anything, right? So several instances like that, you know, where I realized this happened. So what I would typically do in this case is I would go with the, you know, the heavyweight there, with the person who is dominant, at the same time drawing in the other person, you know, the way Michelle, I think, earlier pointed out, right? You know, kind of pull the other person in then and say, you have worked in this area as well, right? In the past project, you worked in this area quite a bit. I know you had a lot of contribution in this area. What are your thoughts on this? You know, what do you think about this? So that way you are kind of balancing it out between these, you know, the person who is very dominant, who has technical expertise, who is always there to talk about stuff and then, you know, argue. And there's the other person who is quiet, hesitant to say anything for several reasons, right? So bringing those different voices in is really important for having healthy conflicts at work. And it is very important to have that conflicts in for productivity, right? You know, that those diverse opinions are really important to have that efficiency and productivity at work.
I think I'll add a comment about the differences in how people disagree as well. Some people are just very uncomfortable disagreeing in front of a group. And so being able to have multiple ways of bringing in your opinion, perhaps having a discussion forum or speaking with the person individually, understanding how they like to provide their feedback. Perhaps they would rather give it to you personally and have you represent their feedback. You know, making sure that you take that time to get to know the preferences of each person and then support bringing all those conversations into the final piece, right? That person may be dominating the conversation because they just love to speak in front of a group, right? So understanding that is critical for sure.
I really appreciate the comment you made, Heather. You know, kind of understanding the personalities, right? And you know, asking them ahead if they have any concerns and bringing those, you know, you can be the representative of those people who are afraid to speak. I think that's a great you know, suggestion. I think I'll take away from this you know, this discussion. It's I think I would also implement that in my work. I guess, I know, before any meeting, right, I would reach out to people and then say, please, put in any concerns or, you know, comments you have, and then maybe bring those in front of the group. That way everybody has a voice in, in those meetings, right? Yes, thanks so much. That's a great suggestion.
I love that as well. And I think, sometimes a pre-read will help as well so that folks can gather their thoughts. And, the struggle I have, maybe some of you can relate to this. I can debate on a dime. I enjoy it. I love it. I appreciate it. Not everybody likes that. And so that's what I have to remember is that sometimes I can be the dominant person because I'm trying to get the debate going and others are just simply uncomfortable with that. So I have to often remember, okay, other people need some time, need some different channels for that. So Heather, thank you for bringing that. And I love your idea of even like a discussion forum where it's maybe a little less um, intimidating to sort of quickly gather thoughts. So thanks, Heather.
Yeah, I agree with you, Michelle. I see myself in exactly your comments there. And Heather's smiling because she knows it's true. But I agree. I tend to be a little bit quick on the draw, and I'm always happy to have a discussion. And I can have a heated discussion and walk away and separate those things, right? I can have a very heated discussion about something, but not let it affect a relationship. But not everyone has that, divisive or ability to separate those things out. So I do agree. I think sometimes taking a discussion offline to where people can comment on it at their leisure rather than like in the moment can really help with that. Um,
Yeah, and I know I've said it before, but I think it all goes back to this relationship and trust piece, and I can tell if it's someone I know really well, I can tell like, okay, they're just holding back and not telling me what they think. I need to go follow up. And so I guess that's sort of the bottom line for all of this is you got to make sure you have strong relationships and some level of trust so that you can read the room, for lack of a better word, because I think that's a key thing when there's some debate or conflict going on that if you have the ability to read the room, you can draw out the people that you need to.
And that's a really good point too, reading the room. And it makes me realize that conflict management and the ability to do that, you need really strong emotional intelligence. And something, I think I brought this up in one of our previous live sessions, but I'm a really big Brene Brown fan. And, she talks a lot about confronting situations and being brave enough to ask someone what they actually meant by something, instead of just making up a story in your head. Because we can really take things the wrong way in a group setting, and especially if there's conflict and things are heated. And I've actually had to do that myself. And as scary as it can be sometimes to go up to someone afterward and say, this is what I heard, this is the way I took it. Is that what you meant? Most of the time, I am making up a bigger story in my head than what actually happened. So just hearing all of you say that, like, I'm realizing how much emotional intelligence really plays a big role in managing conflict. So I'm just myself really enjoying this conversation and learning a lot. So thank you. Anything else around that question? Anybody in the audience have something they wanted to follow up with? Okay, we can move on to Andrea. You had some really great questions too. Let's see here. So some of these I feel like we've maybe like touched on a little bit, but I really like this first one actually, where you're saying the session is called conflict management, not conflict resolution. Why is it important to manage conflict? And that's really interesting. And I'd like to hear, your thoughts and everyone else's on the panel around that.
Well, first, Amanda, I have to tell you that I can't really claim credit for that question. That one was Heather. We did some brainstorming on it, and she came up with that, and I was happy to make use of it. Yeah, and I think it's a great question. But this came up in the chat online, and I think that you can't really ever have a conflict-free organization. I think that's problematic for one of two reasons, right? Either you have a kind of dictator style leadership, I mean, North Korea probably has very little conflict, right? Because of people being very worried about their, lifespan if they disagree with their leader. But on the other hand, so it either means maybe fear, or it means that you're suffering from groupthink, right? So I think it's important as to manage conflict. And there was the great question from Donna before: what if you are dealing with a conflictless situation? How do you sort of inject a little and manage the conflict from that way? And I think that's really, really positive.
Heather, I'm going to pick on you then. What do you think?
Well, and I think there's a couple components here I would point out. One is really, what is the difference between conflict and disagreement? Because disagreement is really important to what Andrea is talking about, to be able to come to a good resolution, come to a design, a decision, etc. together. You need to have disagreement, or you're going to suffer from groupthink, as Andrea mentioned. But conflict, that word brings in another component to that, right? So really, I think digging into the difference between conflict and disagreement is a good place to go to. Does anyone have any thoughts on the differences between those two? Or would you define them the same?
I love the question, Heather, and I'm just kind of sitting here noodling on it and trying to decide if I would um, if I would define them differently. I'm not fully sure that I would, because I think disagreement generates some really good conflict. So maybe disagreement is the root of conflict, would be my thesis.
I love that, Michelle. As an engineer, I'm like, Heather, just ask me to derive an equation. Don't ask me about what words mean. No, my immediate thought process was to think about like conflicting design components and all that, right? And so I guess I think maybe, Heather, you were reading more into the word conflict than disagreement. And I guess I think of it as a particular type of disagreement where, so yeah, I guess I like Michelle's thesis a lot. She did a great job of using words to come up there. I don't know that I see them differently, but I do like the thinking there, that we might all be defining it differently. And so I think it is important that you get us all on the same page for that.
So I'm curious if everyone else.
I think, Heather, I think disagreement in a conflict could be a higher version of disagreement. I don't know if you agree with me on that, or if you disagree with me there. A conflict could kind of involve more than just disagreeing on smaller things. It could involve motivations, values. When your needs are not met, particularly when conflict particularly arises when your needs are not met. Your needs do not align with my needs. That's when conflicts typically come in. And sometimes it also involves values. Many times it involves values. Whereas disagreement could be on smaller things, like for example, my kid wanting to play on his iPad for half an hour, me saying that, no, you play for 5 minutes, right? That could be a disagreement as well, but that doesn't have to turn into a conflict, right? So I think understanding that difference, and where you play softer on some aspects, and where you have to play harder on some, that's where I think the difference comes in. And then I think a comment that, again, I'm turning back to Michelle, a comment that she made earlier, saying that understanding where to play that role of moderator versus resolving a situation, right? There are instances where you cannot play a role of moderator. You have very you're very time bound, you got to solve it. You got to fix it right there. And you take one side and then say, there you go, this is the solution, right? And most of the times I follow the suit of, at least with my teams, I tell them the why and what, and I let them figure out the how, right? Most of the times. The same goes with conflict management as well. I don't take sides, I let them figure it out. But if we are time bound and if that needs to be solved, I do take that role, and then I tell them how. This is how it needs to be done. Go ahead, right? So that understanding that boundary, that where you got to put your foot down, whereas sit back and look at them. That's really important, I think, in conflict management.
I agree. I have to say, when I think of the two words disagreement, to me, I always feel like this is something healthy. Whereas when I hear the word conflict, I think of combative. I think of things that have really risen above healthiness, right? Not that that's a word, but you get my point. So I always think of conflict as being a stage beyond disagreement. It's risen too far, and it's time to start resolving this. It's not just disagreement anymore. I won't say that that's the right answer, right? But that's how I see it. And I think that's important to notice, that all of us really do see those two things slightly different. The other component of this question is, why is it conflict management, not conflict resolution? And one important thing to recognize there is that conflict resolution is a component of conflict management. You need to get to the resolution. That's not the whole of the process, right? The whole conflict management is a process, with resolution being one piece of it, hopefully the last one, right? So recognizing that you need to be able to get through all the stages to get to the end, to the conflict resolution piece.
Does anyone else in the audience have any other follow-up or thoughts? Oh,
Yes, I have one
Tom.
question. Can I ask this question?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Yes. Yeah, when you in the team meeting, sometimes your manager always want to say something on behalf of you, but sometimes the manager modify or give the message from his or her perspective. And for some internal staff, they always want to sugarcoating some of the stuff. And if you want speak up, what's the best way you can speak up, but you still can keep a good relationship with your advisor? So what's the suggestions you have?
I love this question because I think it happens a lot. It's common. One thing that has worked for me, and again, I've had to dial it back. In my early days of my career, I would have said, well, that's wrong. Here's what I think. And that did not have a happy ending. So don't do that. But one thing that has worked well for me has been to say, would it be okay if I offered a perspective, right? Ask permission. 9 times out of 10, they're going to say, oh, yeah, what are you thinking? And then you kind of couch it a little bit and kind of say like, hey, I heard everything you said. I was kind of thinking about it this way. And then it's really all about like you and your thoughts. You're not saying they're wrong. You're acknowledging, you ask permission, you acknowledge that you heard them, and then you offer your thought. And then generally they will either come back and sort of, tell you why maybe they still disagree with you, or they'll say, I hadn't thought about it that way. But I think that's a safe way that has worked for me. Works way better than my old approach.
Thank you.
I think another piece to add to that is when it raises to this level where you're not sure if that's something you should be bringing up, what the situation is, there's two pieces there. One is, do you know your leader well enough to know how best to approach them? So understanding their perspective, understanding them, their emotional intelligence, all of that is important. Once you know them well, you'll know the best way to handle that situation. So active listening, really understanding them. But the other piece is whenever you're feeling that you're not quite sure, then it's probably always best to take that one-on-one rather than in a meeting setting, to talk to that manager one-on-one, explain your side of it. And that way you're having that conflict without it being in front of the group. I know that means that your perspective is getting delayed, but generally that's going to be better than bullying forward in front of the entire group, because that will have other consequences that you may not appreciate.
Yeah, that's a good approach. Yeah, I follow up on another question. If you work for a company, you always wanted the visibility. And regarding the visibility, of course, the manager sometimes don't want to speak for you. In that case, what do you do?
I just want to make sure I understand your question there. So you're saying when the manager is insisting on speaking for you, then what can you do?
Yeah.
Yeah, then for me,
you kind of covered or hide by the manager.
yeah, I mean, if the manager is insisting on speaking for you, then for me, I would handle that in a one-on-one conversation, as Heather said, and say, hey, when you are speaking for me, I'm feeling like my voice isn't being heard, or can you help me find a way to ensure that my voice is being heard? But I think then that becomes a one-on-one conversation.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not talking about this for me now. I'm just I thought about some of my historic situations.
Yeah, I think I agree with Michelle on that. It's very important that you speak up, right? Sometimes we would think, okay, step back and then let the manager speak for you, but I think it's important to step up and then have that one-on-one conversation with the manager. Sometimes your manager might not even know that he or she is doing it intentionally, right? They would just won't realize. Sometimes some people don't just realize, so it's important to let them know. Then you would know if you're giving them an opportunity to correct, right?
And this is Donna too. Maybe you, even depending on the relationship that you have with that manager, just starting it out like, I feel like I'm making you work too hard these days. You're having to speak for me in these meetings. I'm making you work too hard. Can you coach me through a way that I can do it for myself, and then you can get some time back in your day.
I really like that, Donna. Heather, you recommended a book in terms of understanding management style, and do you remember that we had a conversation and you recommended a book to me that I was thinking that might be a good recommendation for folks here.
Was it the cultural one?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So yes, I think I actually have it here somewhere. Yes, I do. Actually, it's right at the front of my bookcase. Until I use this far too often. It's called The Culture Map by Meyer. And it has to do with different ways that people handle different soft skills depending on their cultural background. And so it's generalizations, but once you learn the generalizations, then you can see how they apply to different people and learn strategies for dealing with that generalization. Everyone's different, so it's not going to necessarily apply to each person, but it does help you recognize patterns and then see the remedies you should use for those specific patterns. So it's a great book, a wonderful read, really helps you see how different we all are. You're so used to how you think that you hit everything with that type of viewpoint. And it really helps you recognize how everyone really approaches all these situations differently, how they communicate, how they lead, how they deal with conflict, all of those.
That actually reminds me, Heather, I think another important piece of all of this is understanding yourself in understanding why certain things are rising up within you when conflict arises, especially if those are certain negative things that are rising in you. Um, and and kind of figure those things out about yourself, because then I think you can help others help you get what you need.
You know, I feel like I want to share an example from the past here, so I'm going to. In my old role, many people told me how much they admired my ability to deal with when things go wrong, with conflicts, and how to be able to handle them. And I was really surprised because I felt like I did horrible. And it turned out that when something is going wrong, I freeze. And inside, you know, my brain is going a million miles a minute and thinking, oh no, this is horrible. But on the outside, I am very calm looking and very, you know, people think that I am just a calm person coming in to manage everything. And it's really that I'm freezing up. And what that really told me is just how important it is to remain calm in these situations, to really take the time to think and go through all the different implications of different ways of handling the situation and what those outcomes might be. It's really important to take that time and not just give the quick answer that's at the tip of your tongue. You know?
What are your thoughts, and this just kind of popped into my head, about like the real, like being like vulnerability when it comes to conflict, and being able to, you know, whether you're in a leadership role or it's a peer situation, you know, just being able to admit that maybe you did something wrong or you created maybe a situation. I don't know, that just kind of occurred to me just in this moment, that being able to be vulnerable and sort of be real, in some of these moments too, is probably another tool in your toolbox.
Yeah, and it requires a good organizational culture to be able to do that, right? And to be able to admit, you know, a mistake, or take that step back, right? I mean, if you feel that your organizational culture is not one that would be accepting of mistakes, it's harder to do that. So yes, it takes confidence in you and as an individual and accountability, right? To accept that accountability. But it also requires a work environment that's going to be respectful of that.
Vulnerability also drives some really cool debate slash conflict, in the sense of when you kind of admit up front, like, I don't have the answer here. I'm getting a little over my skis. I need you guys to help me figure out what's going on. Then people feel automatically free, like they want to jump in and help me. So I think vulnerability, when it's authentic, by the way, people will see right through it if you're faking it, but vulnerability, when it's authentic, can drive some really super cool debate.
That's awesome. And you know what? I'm glad that we touched on also, you know, the culture part. And I know that we hit this up a little bit earlier, but, you know, moving on to a question from Heather is, you know, what aspects of workplace culture are necessary or helpful to ensure healthy disagreement? So do you guys have some examples from your own workplaces, or, you know, just from past situations that, have been helpful to establish that in your culture?
Yes, Amanda, I think I have a great example, you know, an experience that I can share, I guess. It was a couple of years ago. We had some concerns at work. You know, all these coffee machine talk, right? You know, we have issues. People talk at coffee machine. Nobody wants to speak up. You know, talk to their manager or the director, and then you kind of have these groups talking about this issue. We have this town hall meeting where the whole you know, team comes together, and the director speaks to the whole team. And then you know, the director kind of gives you 15 minutes to ask questions, right? And the whole conference room was quiet, right? This whole 150 people were like quiet, sitting, no questions asked, whereas everybody is boiling, you know, within us, you know, with all these questions and concerns. That we have this cross-functional coordination issues. Nobody is speaking up. And I was that one person that, you know, stood up, and I said, okay, I have this question, we have this concern, we've been having issues with, with our cross-functional organization, and we are not getting enough support from the management above, right? From including you. And that was a very bold thing of me to do, right? So it's, he was like 2 layers above me. He's giving you an opportunity, and you spoke up in front of this 150 people, saying that he's not doing enough, right? So which was very bold, and but I knew that he's a person who absorbs, right? Who takes in feedback, particularly critical feedback, right? That's important. So I spoke up, and he was a sport. He answered that. He said, okay, I want to look into this. I want to have a one-on-one conversation with you and then talk about it. I said, I'm glad. Thanks so much. And after that, after the meeting the next day, he comes to my office. And then he says, Kaushi, I want to speak to you for like 5 minutes. Do you have 5 minutes? I'm like, yes, absolutely, sure. And then he talked about this issue, and he said, I really appreciate you saying that in front of those 150 people. It takes courage for someone to speak up against their boss in front of all that big audience, right? And we should all question the status quo. We should really speak up. Only that brings us all together. And so from then on, right, I never hesitate to speak up. Whether it's 150 people, 1,500 people, I speak up. I speak my mind. I say, this is the concern I have. Well, sometimes you put it the right way, right? You don't always say, oh, you're wrong. That's not the way we say, right? But there's always a way of saying things. So give them a context, give them what the problem is, give them why the problem you think it's not being addressed, right? And give them an opportunity to look at that. I think that's one way leaders can really set that organizational culture, where they come down to people and then say, you're encouraged to question, right? You're encouraged to speak up. That's a tone that I think leaders should really set. It's on leaders particularly to set that stage. And sometimes even for individual contributors, it's important to kind of encourage that, so your peers understand that yes, we can do that, right? We can talk, we can speak. It's a culture that needs to be set from by the leaders. At the same time, we should help our peers also to raise up and speak against anything that's unjust.
I think you also just gave a great example of what we were talking about before, which is your leader, sort of managed conflict by letting you know it was a safe environment for you to speak up, which then gave you that confidence to continue doing it. And so I think that's really an important thing, and it goes directly to the title of this, right? Managing conflict. I think that's a great example of a leader managing conflict well.
Yeah, this is actually what I want to ask a question. That I was, this is a company that they lost the trust, and then with that, many people withdraw themselves from the company. They looked for other jobs, and I was just thinking, how as an employee to handle that situation. You are at the bottom, but how you can save the company to prevent that happening. I think yeah, she just talked about the good way to speak up. You have the risk to be published, but you better speak up, and instead of just withdrawing yourself from the untrustful organization. I think that's a really good example.
Yeah, it's a lot harder when you're in a situation where you feel like your managers won't support that. Bringing yourself forward to make those comments in a place where that leader isn't going to support that sort of environment is much more difficult. And one potential way you could handle a situation like that is to speak to them one-on-one and say that I think people are really uncomfortable bringing this up in an open forum like this. would you consider setting up an anonymous box where people could leave their concerns? And that way people will feel more comfortable bringing it to you. And that way you're not saying to your leader that something in particular is wrong, just that people aren't comfortable bringing it up in that forum. And hopefully they'll take your advice, set something up, and then everyone will feel more comfortable bringing up those concerns since they won't have to put themselves out in front of it, you know.
And another thing though is, as a leader, you have to show that you're open to actually doing something actionable if people bring up these concerns, because there's nothing more demoralizing than asking for people's opinion, collecting that feedback, and then totally disregarding it. And so that can really, really damage an organization and trust in leadership.
Does anyone on the phone have any more follow-up questions with this particular topic? No? Well, we have 8 minutes left. Do any of the hosts, is there anything that you would like to pose to the group? I can certainly go back and find another question, but is there anything else that we talked about that you would like to elaborate on? No?
Well,
Yeah, I have one question.
Oh, okay.
I have one question that I hope you can answer. The employees and the managers always have a conflict. For example, the employees want the how to say independence. They work on the projects, but some managers they like to do the micromanager. So how you handle that type of conflict?
I'm laughing at this one because I've been there, and it was not enjoyable. I'm very much an autonomy person. Um, and so, eventually I realized that I was not going to change that manager. So I had to change my approach to the situation to present myself or prevent myself from just going completely insane. And so, what I tried to do was proactively take something and ask for his opinion. And even though I felt like I shouldn't have to do that, that's what was required. Those were the rules of engagement with that particular manager. And eventually, after a couple of years of working for that manager, I needed a change. And so I made a change to work within a different group within the same company. And that worked really well for me. But I kind of took that forward as how I didn't want to do things. So it was a valuable lesson for me. It was also a valuable lesson for me in patience. I'm not a very patient person. And again, I like my autonomy. I don't like to feel like I'm being stuffed into a box or into a square. And so it taught me a lot of patience in how to deal with somebody that had a need for kind of knowing a lot of the details. And so I think, not looking at it as completely a bad situation, but look at what you can learn from it and how you can change your approach to accommodate that person is a healthy way to go about that.
Thank you.
I'll add another component. Sometimes there's a different reason for that behavior, right? A lot of times the manager may be micromanaging because they don't trust you, right? And so spending the time to build the trust between the two of you, and you may not trust them either, right? And so building a relationship, getting to know each other to where you build that trust is going to start reducing that micromanagement. Not in every situation. Some managers are just perpetual micromanagers, and that's not going to change. But quite frequently, it is purely a matter of trust, and you need to work to build that.
Great question, Tom. You've had a lot of
Thank
great
you.
questions, so thank you for providing those to us. This has been a great discussion. Since we only have 5 minutes left, I thought I would just throw another quick question out. I'm just curious, does everyone find it, is it better or worse to have these virtual work situations now with a lot of people working from home? versus being in person? Do you find that there's been more or less conflict, or it's been easier or harder to manage conflict when teams are virtual?
I'm going to give you an economist's answer, and I'm going to say it depends. And the reason I say that is I've now experienced both. So I was working in operations throughout the first year of COVID. So I was in person every day. My husband, on the other hand, was remote. When he was remote with a team that he knew well, smooth sailing, no issues. Then when I took this current job, he then transitioned and ended up in a team that he didn't know. And so now he's been working remotely, has never met his manager face to face, has never met his peers. It's a little tough to read the room or even know, like, if I'm IMing them, instant messaging them, am I going to be interrupting them? Um, so I think that's the challenge. Is the relationship there in the first place? And if so, I don't think it matters. In my current job, I have a lot of flexibility now. I spend a lot of time working out of my home office. Today, I'm in our office. But when I first got into this role, I spent a lot of face time with people here. And so now I feel like I have the relationships. If I give them a call on the phone, it's easy, it's fine, we know each other well. But I think, that's where it goes back to the relationship. If that is there, for me, the virtual stuff is pretty easy.
I'm on the complete opposite side of the spectrum in some ways. I am a remote worker, and I've been a remote worker the entire time. And one thing that was really great for me in this situation was that everyone else was remote too. And so it put it all on an even playing field for me personally. So for my situation, I felt like everything was better. But my coworkers probably didn't, because they were used to all working together in person, and this was such a different change for them. So I do think it's a great way if you do have a mix of remote and in-person workers normally. This situation of having everyone be remote for a while really provided some real benefits to those who were full-time remote.
That makes total sense.
I think as your co-worker, Heather, I think it certainly gave me a different appreciation for, kind of your situation. And then even sometimes when we're talking and, I say, oh yeah, sure, I can stop by and talk to so-and-so about something. I know you can't do that. And so I think hopefully the COVID experience has given everyone some things to think about in terms of managing different work styles. And I think as we go forward, at least UW is going to allow some amount of hybrid work, and maybe that will keep it, in our consciousness.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Amanda. We all learned quite a lot in the past 2 years. I particularly learned quite a bit. I joined this job during the COVID time. I didn't know anyone, right? I haven't met anyone. And some companies, the culture is like, okay, turn your video on, talk to people. And some cultures, no, yeah, your camera off because of security reasons, whatever that is. And so it becomes so difficult, when in this setting. When I joined it, I took quite a few weeks to kind of understand the team, right? And after like a month or so, I talked to my manager. I said, we really need to have, plan for an outing, a team outing. We need to know each other. It's very, very important. Otherwise, we don't have this trust. People don't know each other. We don't know who we are talking to, right? That's important. I need to know who am I talking to, right? Need to understand that person, what their motivations are, what they like, how they talk, how they behave in person. So that was very important for me. As Michelle said again, like, it depends, right? It depends what kind of setting you are in. If you know the team, do you have the trust built up? And in those cases, yes, it's the remote work is awesome, right?
All right. Well, this was fantastic. I can't say enough how much we appreciate, you guys taking your time to be our hosts, and everyone that joined us today to ask such great questions. So again, this is going to be, we've recorded this so we can put this up for other people to access and hear all of this wonderful advice. The online discussion is still happening today and tomorrow. So we'll see what else we get there. But again, thank you so much. And yes, just thank you and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much to you, Amanda. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And to Corey. Corey's on here too. And
Oh,
she's
yes,
my
Corey. Thank you.
wonderful, wonderful coworker. So thanks so much to Corey too. Absolutely. All right.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.